So based on all of these trends, what does that mean for the sector? So where are we going? So that is what happened during the 2016 season. Let's focus on 2017. And I'm going to start again where I've ended off. The impact of the SDGs. Not only are we now looking differently at M&E, but here's the thing now. If we want to measure and we want to align our strategies to the SDGs, we're now looking at completely different data sets. Previously, we wanted to know, so how many boys or girls were affected by our interventions? That's just a quantitative indicator. When you want to measure the impact of equality, you need a completely different data set. You need qualitative data. So what I'm saying to you is that the SDGs and the way we look at development and the way we want to measure the progress on development, we've got to consider completely different things. So let me give you a couple of examples. We are fixated still very much on quantitative data, but if we don't understand if we have a program in the Northern Cape, that is where we've got to start measuring impact. Not number of schools, not number of children. What is the impact of our intervention on the Northern Cape? So we will have to consider geography. We've got to consider gender. We've got to consider human rights. We've got to consider completely different aspects. If you're in health, what was the impact of your program in the Northern Cape on infant mortality? That's a completely different question to how many children visited the clinic last month. So can you see what I'm saying? So this influence will have an impact on the way that you measure. What it also means is, and that is why, I don't know if you've picked up, I've put a lot of emphasis so far on the unintended negative consequences of the decisions we make. We've got to start measuring unintended negative impact. Because not all impact is good impact. Not only that, we've got to look at, is the impact sustained? If you've got a 12-month program, guess what's going to happen? You're going to evaluate probably at the end of 12 months because you want to see what is the impact. But here's the problem. The impact doesn't stop the day the NGO goes, your implementing partner goes. Because here's the issue. You wanted to bring about sustainable development in a community. So the thought process is that impact will continue over time. That will lead to sustainability. So how are you going to measure that? But you're no longer even there. You're no longer even funding the program. So what are you measuring? You're measuring, evaluating a change on a day. That does not speak to ongoing impact, how that impact leads to sustainability. So what I'm trying to say here is fundamentally our impact, our monitoring and our evaluation processes will have to change. We've also asked the recipients in this case, or the participants in our study, what do you think is going to happen this year? And I just wanted to share that with you. There are three critical aspects, whether you are an NGO or a funder. Limited resources and an overwhelming need. Too many new entrants into the space. So I've spoken about the good news about community foundations. I've spoken about the good news of the donor-advised funds. I've spoken about all these new focus areas and funding models. But every time somebody else comes into this industry, we want to reinvent the wheel. So there's a danger in that as well. And then also, because no one's actually sure in our country what's going to happen over the next year, nobody's actually looking at innovation. We're sitting on that money. So what donors and NGOs are saying, that the toolbox we had for CSI and development is based on historic change and impact and programs and portfolios and investment areas. We need a new toolbox, both sectors. Let me explain to you, for instance, why. If we want to focus on sustainability in development, here's one example. I've spoken about training for jobs that no longer even exist. If your CSI program today does not consider the future of work and knowledge-based economies, information-based companies and industries, whatever skills development you're going to do is going to be of little value in the next 6 to 12 months, the next 12 to 18 months, the next 12 to 5 years. So you've got to now start thinking here, not with the toolbox you have. If you want to focus on skills development, you've got to forecast what skills will be required in 10 years' time, so that my skills development program actually focuses on those people getting those jobs. And that is what I mean by this new toolbox. The biggest challenge here is we still got outdated development models. We've got to start making bigger bets. We've got to start considering crowdfunding. I do want to speak about overheads. Guys, we have built an industry that is so resource constrained to its own detriment. NGOs can't give you data because they don't have computers. So here is where the problem comes in. We're actually stuck. Now, what does that mean? It means you've got to start paying what it takes to make that change. You've got to pay for success, because at the moment we pay to implement. Okay, so fundamentally, there's got to be a decreasing power on this issue of overheads. It's a different discussion that's got to be had. We've got to, of course, understand the importance of M&E. I also want to say, in this very fast-changing environment, I do recognize it will take a very strong CSI practitioner to stand up to a social and ethics committee and say, we're focusing on the wrong things. So fundamentally, there's only one way we can change what we do currently, and that is if we've got the evidence of what works or not work. So if you want to have a discussion with your board to change your funding model, your focus areas, you've actually got to show the evidence in order to have that discussion. What we're also starting to see, to have that discussion, you've got to start speaking to the business case. Now here is where there's another structural issue between the development sector and the funding sector. Let me explain that to you. So NGOs claim that they do a community needs assessment. They then develop a theory of change and practice to say, if I do this, it will address this problem. So therefore, the core business of my NGO is to do this. Right? That is how practice goes. Now let me explain to you what happens on the funding side. So the objective here is we've got to use CSI to ensure the future sustainability of our business. Why? Because if the society is not sustainable, we will not be sustainable. So what is the business case for CSI? It's in the return. So here's the issue. We can either enter new markets, we can either have new customers, we can either have new products and services. But there's this disconnect between what communities want and need and what we want to fund. So whose language do we speak? And I can tell you the only way we can see difference is that people have the same kind of discussion and thinking, is now you start talking not just about impact, but return on investment. So, return on investment for the community as well as the funder. What did we get out of it? No, we didn't just build a school. What was the value of building the school for our business. And until you can have that language, we will continue to have a program-based kind of thinking around this. I have spoken about big data and the importance of data throughout this whole presentation. But I do want to say, I think investors have the wrong thinking around data. We think that data is going to come from the implementing partner, which means we're actually outsourcing and dependent on external parties to bring us information and knowledge. So what corporates and investors, social investors, have to do is they've got to build their own information management systems, that they own the data, that they can use the data, so that they can learn from the data, so that there's strategies. And here are different aspects where there are data points where you have to start considering that. We've also got to start making fundamental changes. Let me share with you one of the biggest learnings last year for us was when we busted probably the biggest myth in the industry. And that is the myth of due diligence. Let me explain to you. We will not fund, as a social investor, a program if you haven't presented your credentials. We want to know who's your board. We want to know about your finances. We want to know about your program history. So we do due diligence on an organization. But what do we measure? The outcome of a program. So we're looking at the wrong end of the stick here. So if your grant-making decisions are based on whether to fund a program, the last thing you should look at is their financials. Why? Because it doesn't tell you anything about how this program is going to be successful. So the whole practice of grant-making criteria, of information and documentation and PBO certificates and tax certificates is meaningless. Because once it's just to get into the door. But the moment you're in the door, everything is focused around the program. So how many of you just in the room do a due diligence on program outcomes? Nobody. So can you see where we're looking at? We're looking at the credibility of organizations as opposed to the outcomes, the impact that we want to achieve. What we're starting to see is two very interesting propositions, and that is completely new careers. Here's what's happened. Previously, the corporate sector recruited from the NGO sector. And if you make that career transition, you've got it made, because you went from the poor side of the table to the power side of the table. You have made it. Far thinking and sustainable NGOs now realize we've got to recruit from the corporate sector. Why? Because we need business acumen. We need a business language. We need to write proposals, which is actually a business case study, not an appeal for money. So very importantly, we're starting to see that the NGO sector are appointing key account managers that manages donor relationships, and we're starting to see business development managers being recruited by NGOs. What we're also starting to see on the social investment side is that donors are realizing, I need a different skill. Because I've paid so much attention now to data and evaluation and impact assessment. I need a data expert here. I need research skills. I need evaluation skills. I need information management skills. And I need a subject expert. Going back to my case study of skills development, the reason why we don't see people actually being employed is I've told you about the skills problem we have here. It's the wrong skills and the wrong pace. It's uncredited. It's actually meaningless. So what you need is a skills development expert. No longer a program manager. And so that's what I'm saying about these whole new careers that is developing out of the industry. Of course, if you've got new people coming in, and that's the reason why you're bringing in new people, is to change process and system. So what we're starting to see now is that donors, specifically social investors, are putting out a request and they say, we want a facilitator for one day, an expert in skills development. Why? Because they want to equip their team in one day to say, these are the big things, these are the big players, this is the evidence, here's where you actually don't have to worry about 10 years research. Let us tell you what's the latest and greatest in skills development. So those kind of new structures and leads to a completely different groundmaking system. And that is also why we're starting to see that knowledge management systems have become critical. And I'm not talking about the Word documents. I'm not talking about the Excel spreadsheets that you all run. Because there's no way you can extrapolate information, knowledge, out of a spreadsheet. And now companies are saying, what do I do with all of this data? We're starting to see new approaches completely, where organizations realize we need new competencies, and we're starting to see completely new, different discussions. The biggest new discussion we're probably seeing at the moment is the discussion around finances. And the tone of the discussion is, can you guarantee impact? To get that impact, what will it cost me? It's a completely different discussion to, I want to have in that community a program for 10 learners focused on maths. What will it cost me per learner to increase that pass rate in that community? Now the question is, I want to affect change in this environment. Can you develop a standalone, specialized, customized proposal for me? And I don't know how many NGOs have got that competency and capability. And that brings me to where we're going to get the money for all of us. Now, here was the big constraint in the NGO sector. No profit. No profit must be shown. But NGOs got very clever on how to hide money. And corporates better learn this as well. Because I can tell you, it's not just the budgets being cut, it's even the social investors' operating expenses now be cut too. So what do? They cut, and this is what we saw last year, where I started this morning. We're not going to update the website this year. We're not going to speak to people. People must send us an electronic request. That's where they focused on. But what they forgot is that there are other issues. Marketing, communications, branding, research, impact assessment. That's still got to be paid for. So that's what I call the petty cash fund. That donors themselves, social investors themselves, have to start hiding money because they're running a non-profit in essence as well. So the same principles are going to be applied on both sides of the fence. Which brings me to evidence as the biggest currency. Because I can tell you, it doesn't matter who the funder is, who the NGO are, I've seen it. It's not a proposal that's going to win the day. It is the person who can say, this is what I can deliver for you. And guess what? I can tell you on average, those kind of proposals last year was between 1 million and 5 million flat, one shot. How many NGOs can guarantee that they will get with one proposal 5 million rand? Because it's just a different approach. It says, please, I don't want your money. I'm not here to beg. I'm not going to use that money for that administration and that for program expenses, and I'm not going to use that money for this kind of intervention. What I'm promising you is the impact, the difference I'm going to make. And that difference is going to be yours because you're going to fund it. So from that point, we will have to realign our strategies. We will have to focus on impact versus mission. Let me explain to you the difference. Your vision and mission statement says, we want to empower the communities in South Africa to become self-sustainable. I do not know what that means. It's a problem to me because I have to go and assess whether you did that. But what I can tell you is if you are clear and you say, the impact I want to have with my 100 million rand is to create 1 million jobs in 5 years, I can go and measure that. So I'm saying to you, we've got to turn our thinking and our models, our strategies from mission focused, trying to be a good corporate citizen, to be very clear what is the difference we want to make. Which means we've got to be results driven versus program driven. Because if you want to create 1 million jobs in the next 5 years, guess what? You know what the results are. You still don't know how you're going to get there. But if you know the target, you know what you've got to do to get there. Which means, what are those future spots? I can tell you from a business social investment perspective, the first thing for a social investor is the business goals, the business case. The second thing is community needs. The third thing is employee interests. And the fourth one is, what do I have to do to get my points? So if you understand that is what's driving social investment. So here is, if we talk about sustainable development, where that overlaps. And I can tell you economic, because let's go back to the very first slide. What's the biggest issue in the country? Is economic inequality. So funders want to see economic development. They want to see environmental, they want to see social, and they want to see capital development. What does that mean? In a sustainability and an integrated report, CSI practitioners have to write about the value, the social capital that's being generated by CSI. If you do not understand that as an NGO, in other words, the impact and return on investment, you've missed the plot. It's not about the number of pass rates. It is about how do I use CSI to generate value. And that value process is capital development. So this brings us about a completely different mindset. The investor versus the donor model. The investor is very clear what is the difference I want to make versus a donor what's saying, I want to do good. It is sustainable versus bootstrapped. It's not. It's the big thing is, I want to create 1 million jobs. Not I want to do skills development so that people can do jobs. So it's a completely different way of not just thinking about the future, but writing proposals that will fit with that future. And there is this whole new universe about social entrepreneurship that I haven't even considered. Because here's the difference. Social entrepreneurs speak about risk. They speak about numbers. They speak about profits. They speak about change. They speak about impact. They speak the language of an investor. And if you an NGO and you don't speak the same language, you're dislodged out of this value chain. I do have to mention this demographic change that we're going through. I'm just looking at the room in front of me, and here's the problem. How many of you, except for you, are below 20 years? Below 30 years? 1, 2. I hope the penny dropped. That we're building a future for those people. We're not building CSI and NGOs for people of 60. If you don't get that, your whole strategy, all your programs will be irrelevant. And that is what I mean by new toolboxes. You've got to start thinking about what is this future that I want to create? For whom do I want to create that? What does those people look like? Let me tell you, if you're not building a solution for the 700,000 children that don't have grade 10, who you aiming to help? And those children are between 16 and 19 right now. So if you want to be an NGO that's relevant right now, you've got to have not only those people on your team, you don't only have to develop solutions and programs for those people, but even social investors need to understand that we're talking about sustainable development. What is sustainable development? It means the future. But we're building strategies for today and tomorrow. So please make sure that you bring in those worldviews of those people for whom you're hoping to facilitate the change. Whether you employ them, whether they become consultants, whether you do focus groups with them, understand that there's a whole new generation for whom we're working for, not just the elderly. So, there's two issues that I do want to say. It's a bugbear that I've had for a long time, and that is the academics. And if I get another master's student phoning me about wanting to talk about the industry, I will say no. Because I do not know, and I do not want to know the size of the industry. We know that. I don't want to know who's funding which program. I know that. I don't want to know who's reporting on what. I know that. Here's what I don't know. How do I know that skills development will turn the tide in employment? So the academia and the students have got to come up with different research questions. We need evidence of what works. And so what I'm saying is, investors are doing what they can. The NGO sector is doing what they can, and government is just trying to survive. But there's a missing middle, a connector, a coordinator, a facilitator in this space that is completely absent from this development discussion. In closing, I have shared with you, just going back, a world that has fundamentally changed. And my research premise is that the world cannot change, and yet nothing changed. I am also very conscious that what I've shared with you today, although as sexy as a trend may be, we're still doing very important fundamental work. And I do not want to detract from that. Let's go back to basics. Because my premise is, as much as I shared with you how the world has changed, we cannot change until we've got the basics right. So I'm very conscious that I'm not just asking you to change your portfolios or your strategies. Because if you don't have the data that will inform those strategies, you will repeat the same mistakes. And the data is the basics. The second thing is, we may try all of these new portfolios. If you leave this room now and you're going to go back to your board and say food security is the thing to focus on because it's the new black. What I do want to say is, you've got to consider, is it scalable? Is it replicable? Is it worth it? And can you go the distance? And I see how many funders are saying to me, I want to change the world. I want to change the world in science and maths. I'm so happy for that. The problem is, until you get the basics right, if you don't understand the constraints in science and maths, if you don't have the scale and the model of development for science and maths, it ain't going to work. So what I want to leave you with is, as long as we can provide the evidence of what works, doesn't matter how big a change, as long as there's change. Because fundamentally, that's why we do what we do. And that is why I do this research. Not to tell you what's new and hip and happening, but to share with you that we've got to be very conscious of what we're trying to achieve. And so, going forward, in 2017 and 2018, my wish for you is that may we have the right organizational structures. May we have the right programs. May we measure them in the correct way. May we speak to the real needs of communities. And may we make a real difference. So with that, we've come to the end of that very fast, enormous amount of information. I want to give you an opportunity. I know the feeds have been going. I want to give them time to pass me some questions, but I also want to give you an opportunity to share with me, firstly, what I got right this year, what I got wrong this year, where you think I've missed the mark, and also your view of what it means for us as practitioners on the African continent. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to having some engagement with you. Thank you.